Hey folks, we're live. Thanks for watching. If you're watching, if you're not watching and you're listening, thanks for listening. I am glad to be back recording. I did have COVID and it put me down for really almost 2 weeks. And I am just now starting to feel like a human being again in the last couple of days. So it's good to be back doing this. I'm really excited for this episode. So this is kind of off topic for what I normally do. But if you know me, like a lot of people know me, Letterman, David Letterman, and all of his shows, the morning show, Late Night with David Letterman, and David Letterman show, all those things have been a huge part of my life from the time I was in high school. And I was always wondering why there isn't a really good podcast about David Letterman. And in my Facebook feed a couple months ago, this David Letterman podcast shows up, and like I am with podcasts, I was skeptical. Is it going to be any good? Am I going to like it? But right out of the gate, he had some great guests on, including Eddie Brill, Tom Dreesen. So a couple people have been on my show, but Mike Chisholm has just put together an excellent podcast centered around David Letterman. I mean, laser focused around the Letterman show, and we need that. And that's why I wanted to have Mike on. We'll probably just talk about Letterman, how we discovered Letterman, and what we like about him, and it'll just be a fun podcast. So let's do it this way. Let's bring Mike out, Mike Chisholm.
Scott,
Mike, how are you?
Good, brother. It's a genuine pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for saying those kind words. We will do our very, very best to live up to them.
Yeah, I really, I from the first episode, I was just like, okay, this guy gets it. He knows Letterman and he loves Letterman. He loves what he did for entertainment, and I just thought, anything I can do to help you out would make me feel good about your podcast and everything. And I'm stoked to talk to somebody who is as much of a Letterman fan as I am.
Oh man, yeah. For me, it is an honor to do this. I suffered with a whole bunch of imposter syndrome before the first episode came out. This is something that is years in the making. And I was kind of like you in the sense that I always expected that, the Carson podcast has been around for a long time. Mark Malkoff, friend of ours, friend of our show. And I always expected someone else to do the Letterman podcast. And I was waiting for it and waiting for it and waiting for it. And as that was happening, I was becoming kind of friendly with folks who worked for the show, and it was evolving there. And we can get into as much or as little of that story as you want. But as that was happening, major life events were happening. We lost Tony Mendez, Inky, and it was Alan Coulter. Like, we lost Alan Coulter, and I'm like, oh my God, we're missing the opportunity here. We need to get it going right now. And the other catalyst was the fact that I'm flabbergasted by how quickly, and you and I, as I say this, you are going to relate to me when I say this statement, but 25-year-olds who are just as engrossed in comedy and things might not. I was flabbergasted with how fast Johnny Carson was forgotten by the world. And I mean, we're talking about one of the biggest stars that ever lived. And so it just became this thing where it was like, no, you know what? I'm going to be the guy, and I'm going to start it. And we've had nothing but really, really positive. Even any critiques that we've had have been so constructive. And I'm so excited about being a person that helps to transfer the knowledge of what I believe is the greatest body of broadcasting work of all time, which is David Letterman's entire run. And I'm super excited to be that guy and to talk to people like you.
Yeah. You mentioned that you put a lot of work into this before you brought it live. And that's one thing I can tell. There's something like, I don't know how many million podcasts there are out there right now. And I'm sure you've checked out a podcast that had promise and you found out it was just utter shit.
Yep.
And I've done the same thing. And I did the same thing with this show. I put a year of work into it, finding out, what's the niche, what am I going to do, what am I doing that's different than everybody else? Is this
Yeah.
worth it? And you talk about imposter syndrome. I'm like, am I really the guy to do this? I'm not that great of a comedian. I'm a hobbyist. Am I the dude that should be doing this? But nobody was doing it like me, just like what you said. So, I said, okay, let's do it. And I'm glad I do it, and I'm glad I pay attention to other podcasts that come out and give them a shot, because Letterman is was such a big influence on me.
Yeah.
And my Letterman story, I'll just tell you real quick, is it's the
Please.
morning show. So the morning show came out when I think I was a senior in high school. I was either a junior or senior in high school. And I think I was homesick one day and watched it. And I just started skipping school so I could watch it. And I think they did, it was either 60 or 90 episodes. I probably saw at least half of them.
6 weeks
And
of truancy for you, hey Scott?
yeah, and it was a nutty show, and I just loved what Dave did with it. Rich Hall was just nuts on that show, and
Yeah.
I just absolutely thought it was the coolest thing ever. And then when it went off the air, I was like, oh man, no more Dave. And
Hmm.
then lo and behold, he gets to do late night, and then it was just me staying up late watching Letterman every single night, no matter what.
Yeah. There are many people who have similar stories about the morning show, including, Top of the Heap, Conan O'Brien.
Hmm.
Conan, what I think he was in high school, or just getting ready for college or something like that. Or maybe he was first year of college, and again, seeing it on the TV. Wait, what is this? And I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, what a strange placement for a strange, wonderful show, deconstructing things, throwing it in the morning. It was almost like NBC just had this holding deal and was like, okay, we got to do something with them. Okay, well, let's try something different. To their credit, seeing the talent that they had there, to their credit, taking a chance on something, and to their credit, retooling it and bringing it back for the pot smoking college crowd.
yeah,
In my opinion, early mid '80s, hippest show on TV.
yeah.
Really, at the end of
Oh
the
yeah.
day, so groundbreaking in so many ways. For me, I'm younger. I'm only 46 at the time of this broadcast, and
Mhm.
which is part of the reason why I think the imposter syndrome is really fading for me now. I like the fact that I'm a little bit younger, in the sense of elementary school. For me, I would literally wait for my father to finish Carson, and I would. I told this on another episode somewhere along the way. Um, I would drink glasses of water before I went to bed, so I'd have to go and relieve myself. And around the time when my father would either finish the monologue of Carson or finish Carson completely and go upstairs, and then I would sneak out. We didn't come from money at all. We had one TV in the family room,
Yeah,
and it was the old tube TV, the really thick,
yeah.
radiation. I would sit up to it really, really close and low volume, and I would watch late night because it was so zany. And
Yeah,
a, a kid, a little kid could access it. It's like these new Apple iPhone devices and things like that. You see 2 or 3 year olds who are accessing it. It's so simple to understand it and
hmm
to identify with it. And I felt that way, and it just never stopped. So yeah, that was yeah, definitely hit me right from the very beginning, even when I was a child.
that's great. And one of the things that really sticks out for me, Dave had two real loves. I mean, he would talk to a lot of people, but he
Yeah,
had two real loves: comedians and music.
yeah,
And he had the best musicians and and sometimes bands nobody ever heard of,
yep,
until they did that show. And comedians, I mean, he really had a love for stand up that allowed him to bring on comedians that weren't mainstream at all. I mean, I think he gave Emo Phillips his first spot.
yeah,
I mean, Jeff Altman was on like 20, 30 times.
Yep.
Carol Leifer, John Witherspoon, Larry Miller, folks, all different types of comedians, but he gave them a platform. And then the funny thing is he brought them on when they were first starting out or just starting to get some traction. But if they had a project come up after that, like Larry Miller would be in a movie or something like that, then he would have them on then too and do a
Yeah.
panel discussion. So he had a real love for stand up because he did it. And I think that stuck with him all the way to the final show.
Well, it's funny. I don't know. Like you talk about yourself as an amateur stand-up. I've done it a few times here coming out of COVID, and I do it for the reason that I believe Dave did it. It's like didn't aspire to be a stand-up comedian. Knew I would have to do it as a through line. Knew I'd need to have it as
Mm-hmm.
a discipline under my belt.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's a really valuable endeavor to try and get out there to connect with people. And if you can make them laugh, you can connect. That's fantastic. You make them laugh. That's the cream on top. And also the people that he worked with back in the day at the Comedy Store. How many of those people who he did not forget? You know, talk about George Miller. How many times he'd been on the show? Jimmy Walker. Look at Jimmy. How many times late in a Dave's run, with Jimmy Walker still on the show and guys like that. I love how. I said this to Dreesen when he was on a few weeks ago. It was just, was it a night off for you? Was it just two guys, palling around, or did you come with some stuff prepared? He's like, yeah, I came with some stuff prepared, but it wasn't like a normal comedian on panel who was up and coming, where Dave was just setting the volleyball for them to spike and do their routine. It was him really enjoying reminiscing about the old days and it was kind of a night off when guys like that and gals like that would come on the show. Those were always my favorite episodes, was when someone from back in the day showed up in the guest chair. I loved that so much.
Yeah. One of the things that I found in talking to a lot of his contemporaries from the Comedy Store is he was not an asshole. He was a genuinely nice guy. Everybody liked him, and the funny thing is when the strike happened, everybody from both sides liked him.
Yeah.
he was, I mean, they were pissed off at him for being on the strike side, some of them, but they still said, Dave's cool, and so that reputation going forward when he started the show, he had a lot of great baked in guests, but he just kept having him. It was, he could have said, okay, Jeff Altman, I'll have you on a couple times.
Yep.
But he would have Jeff Altman on, I think, anytime Jeff wanted to come on.
Absolutely. And there's a list of people who are in that category. He's very loyal.
Yeah.
And like Carson, and I mean, I with Carson, there was a few people that crossed him and they never came on the show again. I don't necessarily think that Dave was known so much for that, but the loyalty, though, very similar to Carson in the sense of, if you were a friend of the show, if you were a friend of Dave earlier on, if you were a friend of the show, you were constantly invited back. And I love that. I love that about Dave.
Yeah. And, the flip side of that was his love for music. And, one of the most bittersweet pieces of TV I've ever seen in my life was the Warren Zevon episode.
Absolutely. Yep.
And, I go back and watch it, and all the emotions come up again because I was a huge Warren Zevon. Well, I am a huge Warren Zevon fan too, and just the fact that he just said, screw it, I'm gonna do a Zevon show. He's not gonna be here with us much longer, so I'm just gonna devote the whole hour to him.
I love that. I love, and there's a few times in his career where he was sentimental about something. And he would really go full force with it. Of course, the Carson tribute episode being the one that comes to mind immediately. The Warren Zevon thing, the story about Warren's guitar, which I'm sure you've heard, where he hands it to him. Well, I'm not going to need this much longer, and the gravity of that.
Yeah.
My God. And the fact that Dave is so sentimental, and people talk about some of the other aspects of his personality, and just, he's so razor sharp, and he's so intelligent, and in my opinion, expects that of the people who come to the show. Early on, talking about Crispin Glover,
Yeah.
right, and the antics that he had, and
Yeah.
somebody said, "Well, I'm just being like Andy Kaufman," and
No.
the person responded by saying, "Okay, well, hold on a second. Andy Kaufman prepares months in advance for when he's going to come on here. He doesn't just come shotgun, loosey goosey. Let's do this."
Yeah.
And so people think that because Dave reacts in situations like that, you alluded to the fact that some people think he's an asshole. Famously share threw that out in the air. Not at all. He's extremely sentimental and extremely. He's got a sensitive personality, and his love for music shows that. And I think of Warren Zevon, I think of Eddie Vedder, I think of the Foo Fighters,
Right.
Bob Dylan, for that matter. His affection to the Beatles. I mean, how much cool Beatles stuff did he do, knowing he's in the Ed Sullivan Theater?
Yeah.
Paul McCartney playing on the marquee, Ringo Starr. Just very, very, very cool.
Yeah.
Cool sentimentality when it comes to music. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think he really shaped stand-up comedy in the way that he viewed stardom, because you go back to interviews with Cher, Madonna, all these superstars that everybody is supposed to revere, and he looks at them like a dude from Indiana would look at him like, who the hell are you? And earn your spot in that seat. And with the comedians, they already earned it. And with everybody else, he's like, yeah, I saw you on the movie. What you got? And I really enjoyed the fact that he did that, and he took people down a little bit. And I think stand-up comedy changed a little bit as his attitude towards stardom started coming out. Because I don't want to say that they were more jaded, but they were more comfortable making fun of folks that were supposed to be superstars.
Absolutely. I think, and with those people in particular, like the other dimension I'll add to what you just said is, if he had an athlete sitting in the chair beside him, he had way more. He understood that he was talking to an athlete.
Yeah.
And unless there was something egregious happening, or so, he wouldn't break out the speed bag, the comedy speed bag that he could easily turn people into.
Yeah.
The people that you're talking about, though, some of these stars, and publicly a lot of people say starlets, but I don't think it's just starlets. I think it's anybody who has a camera in front of them all of the time. I don't think Dave was trying to come down on anybody. I think Dave was expecting them to know where they were coming and to elevate themselves to be at the level of where he was at. I honestly think that when it came to some of these people who maybe they were making a career off of maybe looking pretty, or saying a certain thing, having a canned whatever, a dimension to them that was just one dimensional.
Yeah.
And Dave was like, no, if you're going to sit in that chair, let's be multidimensional, and you better be ready.
Yeah.
Don't just be ready to sit back on your laurels. That's how I view it. And it's an extremely intelligent man. And if you start screwing around, okay, well, he's going to do something to make it entertaining.
Yeah.
I do want to comment about the stand-up thing. Folks, again, I talk about how freakish it is that people have forgotten about Johnny Carson and who he was and whatnot. And back in the day, if you did a stand-up spot on Johnny Carson and you got an okay or a thumbs up, or even holy cow, come sit with me at the table, your career was made.
Yeah.
The Carson bump, and we're not exaggerating when we say that. Your career was made. And I love how Johnny has that. I think sometimes he gets maybe pigeonholed into too much of emphasis on that, because he was so many other great things as well. But that Carson bump was the real deal. Right now, we actually have a living, breathing example of that right now, and that's Joe Rogan. I've had on my other podcast, I've had people who have actually been on Rogan's podcast before and
Mhm.
have experienced the Rogan bump. You can have one appearance as a stand-up and be on Joe, and your career is made.
Yeah.
And I don't think there has been an example of that since then. Now, in the
Mhm.
middle, we have Dave moving over to Late Show. And I personally believe that Dave's carrying of the torch of the responsibility to help break new stand-ups is one that was taken very seriously. Talking to Eddie Brill, clearly it was, versus when Mr. Leno took over the Tonight Show and breaking new stand-ups and whatnot. And I don't have a list in front of me, but it would be very interesting to see the lists of comics that are gigantic today and how
Mhm.
many of them got their start on Letterman. I think about, I don't know if Bill Burr got his start on Letterman, but I know he was there very early. Chappelle
Yeah.
certainly did.
Yeah.
And I just love when a guy like that in that position, and Dave, certainly Carson being his mentor, took very seriously the idea of stand-ups to the point where his new show, I went down to California a couple weeks ago to watch a taping, the new Netflix show, That's My Time with David Letterman. The idea that Dave comes out, does a monologue, a new up-and-coming stand-up comes out,
Mhm.
does 10 minutes, gets to do 5 minutes of panel with Dave. I love that he is still doing this even at 75
Yeah.
years old. He's
Yeah.
still breaking new comics. That makes me very happy.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not talking
And
your ear off, dude. I apologize if
no,
I'm.
no, this is
All right.
I would on my podcast when I talk less, it's better. So that
I'll take that advice from mine. I'll take
yeah,
that advice from mine.
yeah, I'm actually talking more on this episode than I normally do. I
All
usually
right.
ask a question and I turn my mic off and let people talk. But and his sentimentality and his love for comedy and the fact that he really watches it is very evident in Norm's Netflix
Oh,
special.
oh,
The after the panel after that
yeah.
was heart wrenching, and you could tell Dave was fighting back tears, and because they apparently watched it live there, and I really appreciate somebody who can um, have a small enough ego or not let their ego take over for them that they can really just sit down and appreciate somebody else's work.
God, that Norm special was it was emotional and incredible, and the way that Netflix did that, that they presented it with so much care, having the collection of people in that room that they did. First and foremost, oh my God, when I saw it, you got Dave and you got Conan and you got Chappelle and David
Mm,
Spade and Sandler was like, oh my God. And I don't know if I'm missing anybody else there, but what a panel that was, first and foremost. And then to talk about Norm, when Dave finished his run, and I will say this to my dying day, the last 6 weeks of the Late Show was the greatest run. It's the greatest finish to any show in broadcast history. That last 6 weeks was just
yeah,
absolutely incredible.
yeah.
Johnny's was awesome too. That last
Hmm.
year of the love letter, but at the end of the day, I think about Norm's very last set
Oh yeah, that was
on Late Show, and it was a Sandler's song. Sandler had the Bette Midler moment.
yeah,
Sandler sang that song to Dave. That was beautiful and amazing. But Norm's last stand up. And when he said the words, Mr. Letterman is not a fan of the sentimental and something else.
hmm,
He has no truck. He has no truck for the sentimental, is what Norm said. But when something is true, it's not sentimental. And I
yeah,
love you. He was saying what, in my opinion, millions of us would want to express to Dave if he
yeah,
would hear love, if he would hear compliments even a little bit, which famously he's a little prickly when it comes to compliments.
yeah,
But Norm got through that shell. It was
yeah,
so unexpected. And then to see the fact that Norm was sick and then this special that came out and hearing the love for him on the other side of things. Well, if that doesn't get you in the heart, if you're I don't even know what to say,
yeah.
especially if you love stand up and you love comedy, and I don't know what to say if that doesn't get you.
Yeah. And the funny thing is when you put Norm and Dave together, they're very close in their demeanor, and
Sure.
uh, even though Norm's a Canuck and Dave's from Indiana, they both have that same demeanor. And Norm didn't like compliments either. You know,
No.
he wanted to go out and do his thing, and I didn't know how much of a soft side he had to him until that special, because Dana and Sandler were talking about, he was getting sentimental during that tour all the time, and I didn't even know he had that in him.
Yeah, and the idea that why did he even record the special? Well, in case something, I'm having a procedure tomorrow. In case something goes south, that's why I'm recording this special. Like the forethought there. And okay, the procedure was fine, but it wasn't too much longer after that he passed, and I mean that shows emotion right there. That shows Norm is as a fellow Canadian, I just appreciate, and it is I would say that it's similar to that Midwestern kind of
Yeah.
aw shucks kind of
Hmm.
not in your face, but Norm could certainly be in your face if and when he wanted to. He was just unique. He was a
Hmm.
unique voice, and one of the things that I appreciate in stand up very much is someone, when Eddie Brill and I were talking the other day, we were talking about Mitch Hedberg, and then the Letterman channel put the Mitch Hedberg set that he did on Letterman on. I
Hmm.
love Mitch, and I mean he had such a different perspective of how he talked about things, and Norm very much that way, and I
Hmm.
just appreciated that so much about Norm. God damn, he's a guy who, again, why start this podcast? Well, because people like that are starting to go. The ones
Right.
that are going early are going now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's like no. Let's do one last hurrah. Let's talk about this stuff. Let's pass that torch of knowledge to some of the younger people. Thank goodness, I think that Norm has enough reverence from comedians who are at the top of their game right now. Guys from Chappelle to Joe Rogan,
Hmm.
huge comics have reverence for Norm Macdonald, and hopefully his name will be around for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope so too. And the nice thing about Norm is there's a lot of youngsters that really like him.
Yeah.
The 20-year-olds still really like Norm. The other parallel I notice between Norm and Dave is uh, they don't they're both outliers, and they don't care about the court of public opinion. They don't care about what's hot and what's not. They don't care about anything except for doing what they think is good entertainment. And I always really appreciated that. Dave's had some people on his Netflix show that I'm like, he had Kardashian on.
Mm.
I don't give a shit about Kardashian, any of them. But he wanted to find out more, and he had her on. So
Well, it's the reason that I think that I'm okay to host this show is because I have a lot in my head, and I know some of the right people and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm also extremely removed from it, and because
mhm,
I'm in from Western Canada,
yeah,
right now there's being a little documentary that's being made, the unlikely host of the Letterman podcast, and part of we're delving into that right now. The team that's doing this right now is delving into the whole idea of why the hell is it you that's doing this? And I think
uh-huh,
so this is a parallel to what you're talking about. The idea that Kim Kardashian and David Letterman could be so far removed from each other,
mhm,
right? That gives Dave an honest to goodness, aw shucks curiosity.
yep,
Okay, I'm hearing all these things. Everybody's talking about all this. Tell me about it. Let me ask you
mhm,
some legitimate questions about it. And he's legitimately curious.
yep,
A former staffer of the show, long term, worked with Dave for like 30 years. Talked to me about how excited he is with my next guest because he's like, I'm seeing Dave preparing for this stuff in a way that I haven't seen him prepare for in years,
yeah,
and it's really exciting to this person to see that, and
mhm,
and it's true, like the level of prep that he has when he comes in and talks to these people is evident, and
yeah,
to me, combined with that curiosity, makes it an interesting show for all of us. People, I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, I didn't know anything about Cardi B.
yeah,
But when Cardi B was on his show, or I don't watch basketball, but when Kevin Durant was on that show, I was riveted to it. And
Yeah.
it's because of Dave's curiosity and his
Right.
way to bridge the gap for everybody else.
Right. And
He's so skilled at that.
he does let them be them too. He's
Oh,
not, he
yeah.
really puts them in a position to have a real talk versus the press junket type talk.
I would submit that he expects that. And if he
Yeah.
doesn't get it, he's going to do what it takes to pull it out.
Yeah.
Like Chappelle, when he had Chappelle on last season, which is if I had a very favorite episode of my next guest, it might be Chappelle's. Chappelle's is certainly up there.
Mm.
I loved when Seinfeld was on as well, but when Chappelle was on there, Dave kept pressing for, do you remember the material that it was, the straw that broke the camel's back of you quitting Chappelle's show?
Mm.
You know, I heard somebody laugh the wrong way at a joke. They went the wrong side of it, found the wrong side of the humor, and you just, at that point there, said, I'm out. And Chappelle kind of danced around it a couple of times, but he pushed for it. And I'm not saying Chappelle wasn't being authentic, but what I am saying is that Dave really, really worked hard to get that curiosity satisfied. And because he does represent the everyman and the everywoman so well, I think that that's where it translates to that universal impact that he has.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. So I wanted to, I mean, okay, we both professed our love for Dave for about a half hour here. So I think that's,
Yeah.
I think if anybody listening doesn't think we like David Letterman at this point, then something's wrong. But I want to talk about the podcast and the plans you have, because I know you've put a lot of effort into making sure that you're putting out the best content you can. But what are you? So one of the things you have to do is have like almost a mission statement when you put a podcast together, so that you stay true to what you want to do. And so what do you want to accomplish in, say, your first year of this podcast?
It's a great question, and I got to tell you, thank you for asking that question, because those are I've got the answer for it, and it's something that I would encourage anybody who wants to step out and do something like this. First off, do it. Just do it. It'll scratch an itch for you, whether it's an income generator or whether it's just a soul income generator. It is worth doing. But what Scott is saying is exactly right. The more you zero in, you can drill down. I hate that I use the term drill down. I'm sorry. The more you can figure out what
you're a business guy. I'm a business guy too. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. The more you can do that, the better the product's going to be and the more satisfying it'll be. And so for this here, I've got a couple. Now, number one, we've alluded to, I want to be the torchbearer. I want to be the guy that transfers knowledge to the next generation. I've got a 25-year-old daughter-in-law who, God bless her, I was showing her some footage of Rupert. And Rupert's, we've got some great news coming about Rupert here coming down the pipe. I wish I could announce it here. I can't announce it here yet, but Rupert's a good friend of the show, and we've got something cool happening. But I was showing her footage of Dave's and Rupert's legendary bit, and she looked at it and she said, "Oh, that's just what Ellen does." And I was mortified because I'm like, yeah, see, there it is. I'm like, fuck that. No. Ellen lifted that from Dave, who may have lifted it from somebody else, but I don't think so. I think they were solving a problem. Dave was becoming too famous. So, okay, how do we figure this out? Well, here's a guy who's not famous. Let's just have him saying my words. And brilliant, one of the greatest comedy pieces of all time. But anyway, she's like, oh, that's Ellen. And no, it's not Ellen. So the big thing for me is passing of the torch of knowledge. It is in my opinion, like I said, it bears repeating because of how important it is. It's the greatest body of broadcasting work in history. And so much of it was just throw it in the trash because we got another show tomorrow night. Throw it in the trash. We got another show tomorrow night. Throw it in the trash. We got another show tonight. Well, it's not in the trash. And here's where, and thank God Dave and company are actually feeding this, because the YouTube channel is lit back up again. Walter Kim and his team are doing a phenomenal job taking some of these moments out of the trash and putting it back in the limelight now. But that's the number one goal, is to transfer the knowledge. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, it's going to be a show that is not scandalous whatsoever. Our show is completely positive. The Letterman Podcast, the most negative we're going to get is Dave told a joke about Sarah Palin that didn't go well and it caused blowback and there was a bit of a scandal, and here's how Dave handled it.
Yeah.
That's as close as we're going to get to negative.
Mm.
Very, very, very few people made it the entire 32 years. Very few people. People came and they left, and they came and they left, and they came and they left, and they went different places. We're not going to focus on why they left. If and when we have Morty on the podcast, and this is doing a deep cut. I don't know how many listeners know who Morty is. If and when we have Morty on the podcast, we're not going to talk about when he got fired. We're not. We're going to talk about his glory days, and he took over for Barry Sand. And we're going to talk about the glory days of the transition of all of these things. We're going to celebrate the good, and we're not going to talk about, because they're a family. The Worldwide Pants Group is a family, and everything that comes with family comes with that organization. And you think about your family and the things that happen within it in the extended family. Well, they had it all. And so we're not going to focus on that. We're going to assume we know that. Instead, let's talk about the wins. Let's talk about the good things. How are we going to do that? We're going to have folks who worked on the show. We're going to have folks who guested on the show. And then the other element that we have on the Letterman podcast, we've already got a couple examples of it, are going to be people who were touched by the show. I have a personal David Letterman story, bona fide story, where I was touched by the show. It was photographed, and I made Dave laugh, and it was photographed, and it was this crazy, awesome moment. That moment is still sitting with me 7 years later. Dave would call random payphones. People would pick up the payphone, and they're still talking about that exchange 20 years later.
Yeah.
We want those people on the show. The people who, and let's collect it all together. Let's build a community, and that'll be a force to do the first outcome, which is transfer the knowledge. The bigger the community that we get, the better the transfer of knowledge will be. So you asked for an answer on the outcome and all that. Yeah, we thought it out very, very well. And that's kind of our mission statement.
That's great. I think the biggest compliment you can get on a podcast is that after somebody listens to it, they want to do more of a deep dive into everything that you talked about. And really, when I listen to your episodes, it makes me want to do that, because you reminded me of the Carson podcast, because I grew up on Carson just as much as I did Letterman as a youngster, and I revered Carson all the way up until he ended the show. But Letterman was a lot more like me, and because I'm an Indiana guy, and so even though Carson was Midwestern, it just Dave's sensibilities were a lot more like me, so I clung to him a little bit more. But I think the fact that you want to bring everybody that you can that touch the show is important, because they all made it what it was. One of the things that I know is, in the early days, I know Dave knew what he wanted to do, but Merrill Marco really really pushed him over the edge of silly, to make it as outrageous as possible. A lot of those early bits were, Merrill's idea, but he took that and he ran with it and did it right. So it's really, and so everybody that had a part in the show or a hand in the show really helped mold what it became to be.
Well, you said a few things there that I think are worth noting. I've got an analogy when it comes to Carson Letterman, because Dave's my guy. He's my doer guy. He's my Walter Cronkite. He is. I'm a Gen X kid. I was one of them flannel wearing, Nirvana listening, coffee house drinking guys. Like I was, and don't trust any of the boomers. And Dave was kind of Dave is my Walter Cronkite. He really, really is. I trusted what that guy said. And especially because he said it tongue in cheek, and he did say it, I love that. But I have an example because I have reverence for Johnny. My dad, never mind Dave had reverence for Johnny. He was his hero. My dad had reverence for Johnny Carson. So the way I look at it, I don't know if you're a Godfather fan, I look at Don Vito and Michael, and Dave's Michael to me. He just is. Don Vito is the earlier older times, or using a musical analogy, Johnny's big band, Dave's rock and roll, however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
But the two are forever linked in the same way that Don Corleone and Michael Corleone would be linked up, in my opinion. That's how I view that. Now, you also mentioned Meryl, and I mean, she is, I talk about my top 5 of people who I want to have on the show. Tom, I've already had Tom on there, unbelievably, double episode, and he's a friend of the show. He's been helping me on the other side, in the background, and I'm so grateful to him. It's a dream come true to talk to him. He's in my top 5. Meryl as well is in my top 5. One of the questions I want to ask her, because everything that you said about Meryl was true, how she pushed Dave into the more zany sometimes, or into the some of these odder places. I love that. But she also has talked about the number of things that they threw away, the number of premises that they would come up with, and it wouldn't make the cut. And they just let it go. And I'm curious, because I mean, her mind is brilliant. She's a genius. There's no question to me that Meryl Marco is an absolute genius. And I want to ask her, is there anything that ended up in the trash that you wish they would have gone for? Is there anything, and hasn't been done since? And that's one of the perspectives I want to ask of her. And finally, the last response to what you said, I think it's important to have people who were involved in the show or affected by the show, the payphone person or whoever. I think that's very important, because one of the things that Dave did when they deconstructed the talk show was they broke the fourth wall. And if you're going to break the fourth wall, and you're going to do a podcast or a retrospective or a tribute, whatever you want to call the body of work we're building, if you're going to do that and you're doing it on a group that broke the fourth wall, well, you better damn well have people on the other side. And we've already had a couple people on who are definitely would say that, they got their memories, they've got their prop from the show that they got, or they talk about their memory. I had sat beside Elle McPherson, or whatever it was. That gave them that in cement memory, and tie to the show. That's the other reason too, is because Letterman broke the fourth wall. He did what no other show really did in how he invited the audience, the mailbag and all the different things that he did to make the audience a part of the show. So I think that was everything you talked about there. I think
and stupid pet tricks and stupid human tricks that came after. You could tell that he was so excited to talk to a normal person, just a regular
Absolutely.
Joe.
Absolutely. I think athletes would fall under that category as well. When he had somebody who normal compared to show business. In the chair beside him. Also, I think that's a Carson. Something that he was able. I know they had to really keep the show and make them different from Carson, especially early on. They were very differentiating was very, very important. But when he had Mr. Wizard on the very first episode, there's a guy right there who, or people who are just normal people. That's something Johnny did as well. The gal with the potato chips. I always bring her up. It's always, I love that. I love it. It's one of my favorite moments. He would have her on there. The animal people, they would have them on there as well. So there were things that were complementary to the Tonight Show of the day, and having normal folks and Dave's demeanor changing and handling with more kid gloves was definitely one of those things.
Now, we talked about this earlier, that he doesn't like to get compliments and things like that. Do you think that he spends any time looking back, or is he just a always looking forward type of guy?
That's a question that I want to ask him. If I'm starting to wrap my head around the fact that there is actually a chance we'll get him on the show. At the beginning, if you would have asked me 6 weeks ago, Scott, seriously, I swear to God, if you would have asked me 6 weeks ago, Mike, you're starting the Letterman podcast, do you think you'll have Dave on as a guest? I would have laughed and said, not a fucking chance. There's no way. There's no way. Tom and I joked about it. And he's like, oh, I like that you're complimenting my friend. You're being there. And we're both like, face it. He'll never watch this episode. He'll never watch this. But I've had there are some people who have been saying, you know what, you might one day be able to be in a position where you can have a conversation with him. Of course, I'm ready for it. I'm ready for it right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe I'm ready for it in a way that is respectful to him
Hmm.
in what he would want. And that a part of that is not talking a lot about history.
Yeah.
It's talking about moving forward because of what you just said. But there is a question I am hoping that one day somebody on behalf of me can ask him, and I want to ask him about nostalgia.
Hmm.
I'm a
Yeah.
very nostalgic person. Part of the
Hmm.
reason that I'm doing this endeavor and the team here that we're doing this is because we're nostalgic for this body of work.
Hmm.
And that is still continuing to this day, by the way. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm so grateful that in 2022, I can say it's a good time to be a Letterman fan. He's
Yeah.
got well-produced stuff and he's got zany stuff on YouTube. Oh my God, thank you. This is fantastic. But I want to ask him if he's nostalgic and what he's nostalgic for. I think Cars is something that he's nostalgic for, but he doesn't talk about it very much.
Hmm.
I think that that's something that's there. And I'm just curious because he is someone who doesn't like to look at the past,
Yeah.
notoriously doesn't like to watch himself in any way. But at the same time, Peyton Manning asked him to come on his show right now. Dave's there and he's prepared and
Yeah.
he's got stuff with him to do it. Obviously, there's nostalgia that is a part of this guy.
Yeah.
Nostalgia for athletics and sports, cars, things like that. But I would love to ask him about nostalgia and I think he would have a pretty cool perspective in the way he views the world. And even answering that question might get people to get him a little bit more and understand him a little more.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like he is very, like what you said, pick and choose what you want to be nostalgic about, because
Yeah.
I'm very similar in that fact, in that, I'm not nostalgic about much. It's funny. I've got this joke that I do that usually gets me a lot of boos. I'm like, and
Oh,
most of it,
by all means, tell it here. This
yeah,
sounds great.
yeah, most
You
of it's
had me at booze.
it's about Led Zeppelin, and I'm like, we're hanging our hats on Led Zeppelin way too much, and
Mm.
they're a fine band. They're they had some great songs. I've just listened to enough Led Zeppelin, and I don't listen anymore. And man, I get booze. I did it one time. I did it one time at a show in a record store. It's a record store and coffee shop that does comedy at night, and
Yeah.
it's the worst thing you can say, but it really
You
is the
go to
way I am.
music
It's funny.
aficionados.
Yeah.
Let's lampoon the greatest band of all time in their
Yeah,
eyes.
yeah, yeah. And I'm the same way. I was a big Doors fan when I was a kid. I listened to the Doors constantly. I cannot sit through a Doors song to save my life anymore. And I'm always looking for new music. What's new. But so I can see where Dave may be a little bit like that. But I'm super nostalgic about Dave. Stuff
Mm,
like X Files and Twin Peaks and stuff like that. I will go
yeah.
back and watch that series again anytime. Uh, you know,
Yep.
versus what's on TV now, most of it. I those things. Um, you know, they meant something to me, and that's the way Dave is. Dave, he was a part of my life. It wasn't just a show I watched. He was a
Yes.
part of my life, just like somebody that was a friend of mine. So
Yep.
that's how I feel about Dave. And you can call that reverence, and you can call it whatever you want, but it's just true. And sometimes I see the way he has actually shaped the way I am. So just
Oh,
like a
without a
friend
doubt.
would, just like everybody who was on his show shaped the show. So that's the way I feel about Dave and the show. And when you say it's the best body of work that has ever been made, I agree with it.
Yeah.
And I can't I know that others may disagree or whatever, but the
Sure.
the fact that he was a force to be reckoned with for so long shows that he was the right person for the job.
Well, yeah, and I mean, of course, are you nostalgic, Dave? music would probably be the number one. Thank you
Yeah.
for mentioning that. I mean, clearly a tremendous amount of nostalgia for music. I mean, I believe you talk about. By the way, let's get you Scott Ryan, who wrote The Last Days of Letterman, and he's written a bunch of Twin Peaks stuff as well. Let's get you guys connected because you guys are going to have an incredible conversation. So,
Yeah.
shout out to Scott Ryan. One of the things that he talks about, the very first time I interviewed him, it was for a different interview that I did with him. I've got a men's mental wellness podcast as well, and that's where I kind of cut my teeth in the podcasting world. And Scott's a friend. He's been a friend ever since I read Last Days of Letterman, which is an incredible book. I highly, highly recommend it. And then Sandler. I talk about Sandler and his song. Both Scott feels this way about Dave, my best friend on TV, and Sandler in his last song to Dave famously sang that. Our best friend on TV. And that's really who he was. I went through a divorce in the early 2000s and married my high school sweetheart. We turned into different people, and it was hard. It was really tough going through that. And I'll tell you this, no more than that time. And this has always been the case for me, especially since Dave changed the format of Late Show a little bit from the beginning. There was a certain point where he changed it, where the opening remarks of the monologue happened. And it used to be, Paul, can you play me to the desk? And Paul would have a little jingle. And here's Paul Schaefer, everybody. And then he'd go to the desk. And then they changed it to after the monologue, they went to a commercial break. And then they came back in segment one at the desk. Regardless, segment one at the desk, when I was going through good times and bad times, one of my favorite parts of the day was at the end of the day, even if it was a rerun, was Dave at the desk. And later on, Dave sometimes would ignore a blue card that had a piece of comedy sitting on it to talk about a bear coming in the house or to talk about – that was Dave talking directly to camera.
Yeah.
In my opinion, being himself, he's definitely talked about how he's more himself when that red light turns on. I loved that. And whether or not that was 100% Dave or that was just Dave in his zone or whatever that was, that guy there was one of my best friends on TV. And I adored that time. That segment of the show was one of my very, very favorite times because it felt like you were just listening to a friend on the phone that you hadn't talked to for a while. They were just going through stuff. And I love that moment.
Yeah. And he and Paul had a really great chemistry. It was, it was almost a frenemy type thing. And okay, Paul, you're the musical director, whatever. And then Paul was just over, just over the moon for Dave. And Dave's like, yeah, okay, Paul, dial it down a little bit. And I love that. I was thinking back to my favorite moment before we started recording, and he did the outside segments where he's going into different places. There's actually two of them. It's when he went to try to talk to the GE folks when GE bought the show, and the guy wouldn't shake his hand.
Whoa! And then Dave, the way that Dave, let's see it in slow motion.
Yeah,
this is where the broadcaster comes out, right? Like again, the broadcaster versus the stand-up.
Yeah.
Goes to shake the guy's hand, and the guy, he started to, and then pulled back, and then slow motioning that part of it. Iconic.
It was great.
An iconic moment.
Yeah. And the other one was when he was working in a fast food joint, and the whole segment is fantastic. But there's one point where somebody asks what's in the kids' meal, and he just says pack of cigarettes. And, and I mean, there's no way that was scripted because you don't know what they're going to say. And I just, I mean, that stuck with me for years.
I'll tell you, people have asked me this question. Do you have a very favorite David Letterman moment? I mean, I've got dozens. There's one moment where well, you know what? I don't know. We're live right now, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? There's a producer by the name of Daniel. I'm not going to even say his last name because I don't want to jinx it. He's coming on Thursday, and he produced the Madonna segment. Do you remember when Madonna came on the early days of Late Show, and she was being a nuisance to say the least. She was
Yeah.
dropping F-bombs, and she was disrupting the segment. You know, they were trying to get Counting Crows on, and Madonna was,
Yeah.
you know, it was a very famous segment. And right in the middle of it, she starts kind of blasting Dave a little bit, and she goes, "I don't know if I like this new you. You know, you're really you've gotten weak, and you're losing your edge, and all of this sort of stuff." And he just looks at her and says, "I can suspend that behavior for tonight if you'd like." And that's my. I was, you know, because she's making fun of the fact he went to 11:30 and they wanted to broaden out to get a bigger audience and to compete against the franchise that has never had anybody compete against them, The Tonight Show. Yeah. Nobody's ever competed for an extended period of time against this franchise. I can get on a soapbox about that, but anyway. But the fact is, he adjusted some and tweaked some things. They brought up Peter LaSalle. They tweaked some things to make him broader, and the fact that I can suspend that, like with that smile, that when Dave has that Cheshire cat smile on his face, and he did, and he's like, "I can suspend that behavior for tonight." That is my quintessential favorite David Letterman moment of many moments, but I love that one.
That's like softly opening a switchblade.
Oh yeah, what a great analogy. Yes. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my God, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, I got to tell you, Mike, I appreciate you coming on, and I know this is a little bit different than what I normally do, but man, I am just really digging the show. The Dreesen interview. The thing about Dreesen is, so he was my first guest on mine.
Oh my God, you didn't. I'm glad you told me that. I'm glad we didn't do very much of a pre-interview at all. It's just like another, like brothers from another mother here. I'm glad. Wow! Yeah, holy shit, that's amazing. What a get for your first interview.
Yeah, I do that on purpose. I'd rather get to know you on air than
me too. Yeah.
You know, when the red light's on, I'm at my best. You know, but when I had him on, he was on Marin, WTF. Yep. Probably his episode aired like 3 or 4 weeks before I interviewed him.
Yep.
And I listened to what he said because I had seen him do his Sinatra show not too far before the interview. And everything that he said to Marin was pretty much the Sinatra show. Yeah. So he didn't stray from that. And my goal was to get him to talk about something different because, you know, he's in his 80s, so he's got, you know, he's got all these memories, and he just wants to regurgitate them sometimes and get them out.
Talk about a torch passer right there, by the way, Tom Dreesen.
Yeah. And so when I got him on, you know, I was very happy to be able to steer him in some different directions and have him talk about some different things. And you did the same thing, you know, because you had a longer interview, he did some of the stuff that he always says. But he also got into some other stories and some other, you know, like when he talked about, being at the desk when Bert Convy had to go to the bathroom. You know, that was something that I had never heard before. And it was really cool that you were able to bring that out. And I think that's why your show is going to do very well, because you're going to get that unique perspective.
Oh man, from your lips to God's ears, Scott. I appreciate you saying that. Definitely intentional. And I think also definitely the part about that curiosity and that separation is that, you know, asking questions that everybody would ask is a risk. Now with Tom, it was easy enough because, I mean, anytime he appeared on Dave's shows, I really paid attention. Those were my favorite episodes. You know, I talk about that first segment. That first segment I had reverence for. I also had reverence for whenever he had somebody on the couch or in the guest chair that was from his past. I love that. And so Dreesen was a guy that was really easy. And again, you talk about a torchbearer. I mean, the guy, you know, it's so weird how two guys from the Comedy Store come up together, and one's a bit of a big brother to the other one, Tom for Dave. But then one of them becomes kind of an heir apparent torchbearer for Frank Sinatra, one of the biggest stars the world has ever seen. And the other one becomes sort of a torchbearer mentee of Johnny Carson, the greatest, I mean, it's crazy that and they've remained best friends ever since. And so, I mean, so much meat on that bone when it comes to, that's actually one of the ways that I think that maybe there might be an opportunity to get Dave on the show. If I could have Tom and Dave doing Zoom with each, and I'm just kind of sitting there and every once in a while throw something out, the perspectives of those two men are kind of like, Lord of the Rings, hobbits looking at the rock giants throwing things at each other. Like, they're giants in the entertainment world with stories that just, in my opinion, need to be preserved. Tom is making a career out of doing that. And I got to tell you, I alluded to this on the podcast, but I'll tell you here. When I reached out to Tom, he immediately said yes. Yeah. No problem. And it was like, okay, great. That was easy. All right. And then we got on the phone and I told him kind of the mission statement behind the podcast. And I said, look, this is what it's all about, Tom. It must be weird when guys like me just start talking to you and we know a lot about you. Well, I've, read Born Standing Up. I've seen all the docs. I've seen, all the things. Plus, it was in a special time for me when you were sitting with David Letterman. Thank goodness Tom's not the type of guy that would hear something like that and get all wigged out about it. He understood that it came from a place of purity and just appreciation and love. But when the mission statement and all that shit came out, he was like, okay, Mike, I want to do the show, but with what you're describing to me, I just really feel like I need to get Dave's blessing before I do. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, I'm a month into this at this point with a lot of preparation and a lot of stuff in my corner, a lot of momentum. I get that, but I wasn't prepared for that. Yeah. And I was just like, oh, okay, Tom, that sounds good. Okay, well, I guess I'll talk to you when I talk to you. And he's like, oh, no. Dave always gets back to me right away. Yeah. Unless he's somewhere, where he gets back to me right away. I'm like, okay, click. And at that point, I'm like, oh, shit, whatever. Okay. This thing just kind of got turned up a notch to me, and it's all perception. It's all, but at that point there, like, the universe was stretching me a little bit. And thank God the universe didn't play with me that long. It was about 45 minutes later, he calls back and he goes, hey, Dave is totally fine with it. And I'm going to say this off. I'm not going to say the specifics because one of the stories we didn't get to, and we're going to tell it the next time he's on. He's like, he wants me to tell this story and this story and this story. He thinks this would be funny. Like he actually had bits and ideas. One of them is a really funny one, and I can't wait to execute it the next time Tom's on. And then the night that we shot, so it's like, okay, well, let's do it tonight. I was like, let's get this done. Like, I can't believe this. I didn't tell anybody about it. I was just like, holy shit, this is amazing. And and so we start the recording, and I've got my phone kind of to do some pre-shots and things like that. And we get into it. And Tom said, listen to me, I need to tell you something. You're going to have some people, and I've got a recording of this. We're going to make it part of the documentary. And I've got a recording of Tom saying this. Look, I talked to Dave, and I told him exactly what your show is doing and whatnot. And anybody who might be a little squeamish about coming on, you tell them that Tom Dreesen says that we got the seal of approval. Anybody can come on the show. And to hear that from him, you talk about passing torches, but being the recipient of a little bit of that dust that these guys emulates from them. It's a glow. Yeah. And when you sit in that, I swear to God, Scott, it was like I met my very favorite uncle for the very first time. It's like, you got a favorite uncle and you've got this reverence and this relationship. It's like I met my favorite uncle for the first time. Yeah. Mike, this is your Uncle Tom. You've never met him before, but you guys are going to be good friends. And we are. Yeah. That's what Tom Dreesen is. He is an amazing man and has given me fire in this little rocket that I'm attached to. I just appreciate him so much. I love that he was your first guest. That's great.
And that was by design as well because he was my first comedian. I used to
Oh,
watch him on Mike Douglas and Merv Griffin and Dinah
oh, that's
Shore and
awesome.
Carson. Before Letterman was even around, and he was the
Yeah,
first person I recognized as a comedian that made me laugh. And in the old days, what I would do is grab the TV guide and look for his name on the different talk shows, and I'd make
yeah,
sure I'd watch when he was on, and
yeah,
and the I paraphrase. We're in a comedy group together, and I introduced myself and I didn't even know Tom was in a group, saying that Tom was my favorite comedian and stuff like that. And then I paraphrased a bit that he did. I'm not going to even try it again because every time I do it, I say it wrong. And
yeah.
then he commented on it, and he said, "No, this is how it went." And he says, "Oh, and by the way, I haven't even thought of that bit for 35 years."
Oh,
He remembers everything he's ever said. The other thing that is cool between him and Dave is they both did what they wanted to do because
oh, very much
Tom could
so.
have
Yeah,
done so many other things.
yep,
He had sitcoms written for him. He did a talk show for a short period of time.
yep.
He had a lot of things he could do, and then he got the Sinatra, Sammy Davis before Sinatra, and then Sinatra, and that's what he wanted to do. And
Yes.
he could have been more of a household name,
Hmm.
but he didn't want to. He wanted to do what he wanted to do,
Yeah.
and Dave did the same way. He did everything on his terms, and that's really, you don't see that a lot anymore.
No, and Dave did. It's funny how Dave did everything on his terms, whether he wanted to or not, if that makes sense. Like you think about the fact that I'm so glad he didn't get the Tonight Show. I'm
Yeah, oh yeah,
so glad
oh yeah,
because he would have been the guy just because the landscape of television changed so much. He would have been the guy where it diluted.
yeah,
I think it would have diluted slower. Don't get me
yeah,
wrong. I think it would
yeah.
dilute it a lot slower than it did because by him going across the street, I told you this is the subject I go deep on. I can go so deep on this subject. I'm passionate about it too. But the fact of the matter is, if Dave would have had his own terms, he would have had the Tonight Show. But what did he get better? Well, because he walked across the street, he literally walked right into Carson's contract,
Yeah.
which included ownership,
Hmm.
which included, and his only job, and I say that facetiously because it's never been done before, his only job was to build a franchise that could have a lasting competition against The Tonight Show, and it never happened.
Hmm.
So I say that, so was it his own terms? No, but when he moved over across the street, it was 100% his own terms because he
Hmm.
wasn't laid out by the moment whoever replaced Johnny Carson, the leash was extreme because ownership came back to NBC and the affiliate level of hobnobbing with affiliates, which is a famous example, but so many other things. Oh, we've got Blossom. You make sure you have Blossom on in the first slot because she's an NBC show. Whatever you want to look
Hmm.
at. I mean, and the fact that Dave didn't get what he wanted, but he was able to do his work on his own terms because he didn't get what he wanted. There's many examples of that as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah, and it's really neat to see, and that's why his show is the body of work that it is.
Yeah.
You know you can put in the time, and I can name any number of hosts right now that are putting in the time and doing their weird shtick and stuff like that. It doesn't. It's not going to stand the test of time. And the last thing I want to talk to you about
Yeah.
is one thing you can't look over is the fact that Steve Allen had a big influence on Dave as well.
Yes.
So you got to go back and watch some of that Steve Allen stuff because his some of his mannerisms, some of the silly stuff that Steve Allen did when he did the Tonight Show, a lot of that carried through just as much as Carson, I think,
Oh, very
because
much.
he
Yeah.
was definitely an amalgamation of both of them, but and still being his own man. But I get down these rabbit holes of looking for Steve Allen videos. Some of the stuff he did was so groundbreaking,
Yeah.
and just fantastic, and I see that in Dave, what Dave put out too.
Well, you talk about the playing without a net that Steve Allen went through, being live,
Yeah.
and the times. I have a I have an affiliation in the pro wrestling business a little bit, and I've been invited behind the curtain, one of the things that they talk about is the idea of making chicken salad out of chicken shit.
Uh,
And Steve Allen, I don't know if in entertainment, and again forgotten. I don't know if there's a man who was better at that.
yeah.
And finding found comedy live
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
in insane pressure. Incredible for doing that. I don't like to go through a podcast, whether it's one of my own or somebody else's, where I talk about David Letterman in any way without mentioning Don Giller. I don't know if you know who Don Giller is. He's the in my opinion, he's the Undertaker, or not the Undertaker, but the keeper, the record keeper of. He's got the largest Letterman collection of all time.
Oh, okay.
He's got everything archived and everything databased, and I don't know if there's a bigger expert out there. He has on his Giller, Dongiller. He's got a YouTube channel, and if you haven't watched this, I highly recommend, you in particular mentioning Steve Allen, you're going to love this. It's a compilation, and I think it's 7 parts long. I think every part is like an hour, and it's Dave centered, but it's every single talk show legend encounter Dave ever had on the show. So Parr and Allen, of course, and Carson and all of that. Every single time they were on the show, it was their interactions, and they started very, very early. When Dave was just cutting his teeth. I mean, in late night, when you look at his early interviews versus who he became in the end, the evolution is amazing. And the way that Don collected those things together, and he put them in chronological order. So you literally watch Dave aging and getting better as he's talking to these legendary talk show hosts and showing clips and doing all sorts of things that, you see the influence there. And to me, that's Scott, that's a fascinating afternoon for me. I know I'm a big nerd when it comes to this stuff, but if I need to feel better, I go on the couch and I'll watch that for a few hours.
I was going to say, that's a rabbit hole I'm going to jump into maybe tonight.
Absolutely. Subscribe to Don Giller's channel, man. He's the if it wasn't for Don during the dark years after Dave retired in 2015, a lot of his stuff would have been forgotten. But Don has kept that alive, coming out with these compilations and whatnot, and I just appreciate that so very much. And I talk about it every opportunity I can, just because I appreciate him so much. Yeah,
that's great. Well, I tell you, Mike, the podcast is great, and I know you're going to do great. But I'm going to be sending people to listen to it. Everybody I know.
I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, and I don't, I'm kind of a podcast snob, and I really don't get into a whole lot of shows except for the ones I like, and this one really struck me, and like I said, I was skeptical. I was like, okay, some dude's throwing shit at a wall and calling it a podcast, and I'm like, if he besmirches Dave, I might send him a strongly worded email. But you're doing it right, and I really appreciate that you brought it up, and you are the right guy to do it for sure.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that, and every time someone says that to me, it makes me feel that much more confident. The imposter syndrome thing is especially this documentary that's being made around me. It's really helping me delve into the idea of the imposter syndrome and how many times that's just us. And what we have to do to leave those things behind. These words certainly help. We made the decision to do the podcast itself, but also the YouTube show. So what you see on YouTube, you can go to the Letterman Podcast. You can find us on YouTube. We'd appreciate the subscription, obviously, if you want to go a step further and like it and share it. We'd appreciate that. So we've got exactly what we're doing here. You've got it on video, but then we also put it up audio wise, where all podcasts can be found, Apple, and the video version is actually on Spotify as well, because it's a show, but it is a podcast, of course. But we want it to be a show too, where the video is there, and when we have some of these people on, you see the emotion as well as
Yeah.
hearing it. So we think it translates very well both ways. I'd appreciate any follows and any of that stuff. We're on the Instagram. I'm not very good at the Instagram, but at the Letterman Podcast. We've got a group on Facebook. If you look for the group on Facebook, I really want to grow that group, and we're going to be giving away some things. I'm going to be giving away a couple things out of my personal collection, some late show scripts, and
Cool.
I've got some pretty cool Letterman memorabilia actually, and
Yeah.
we've got a bridge from the set that's arriving this week that was going to be part of our background. So we're going to be upgrading the studio and doing some fun things. It's a good time to jump on board. And Scott, I can't thank you enough for reaching out, man. I can't wait. Let's make sure that this is a friendship that continues on, and
Yeah.
let's have you on the Letterman Podcast one day.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to do it. Yeah, I've got enough stories we could talk for hours. So yeah, thanks so much, Mike. And folks, make sure you check out the Letterman Podcast. The group is great in that they actually interact with you. So if you post something on there, folks will talk to you. And some groups aren't quite like that. So I like that you're putting the effort into making sure that the folks that listen are heard and appreciated. So you're doing everything right.
Thank you, sir. That means a lot coming from you, Scott. I really, really appreciate that.
All right. Thank you. And let me get off a line.